Hello, welcome back to In Conversation. It's another week gone.
Yeah, very fast actually.
Yeah, so we'll be in the middle of the year before we know it. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been an article circulating on the internet written by someone from the Telegraph. So if you read the Telegraph, you may have seen it. If you don't, you may not have seen it, but it's currently free to read as we record this. It's currently free to read on their website, and I think someone's going to put a copy of it through my door from the printed edition. They're talking about the Church of England, and the headline is something along the lines of, can the Church of England survive COVID? And talking about how actually over the last few years, with the missional statistics that we're currently compiling for last year, what we've seen a not necessarily a steady decline, but a dramatic decline in the number of people attending Church of England churches to worship and being part of them. And we're seeing the decline of the Church of England. Some dioceses are struggling financially, and a few years ago we saw a couple of cathedrals almost declared bankrupt with the potential of having to be sold off. And so I think it's kind of public knowledge and fairly well known that the Church of England in some places is in quite a crisis, and it's quite a challenge. But this article was saying, or can it survive? And noticing some of the criticisms and some of the challenges it faces. It then went on to look at some of the places in which church was actually thriving and how church had changed and adapted and things were going positive. But it also fired a load of criticism about how church is right now. And I think we kind of wanted to just share a few thoughts on that and think to the future.
Yeah, I think over the last couple of weeks, my churches particularly have been thinking about whether we should remain open or close, which I know is a decision that a lot of churches have had to face in recent weeks in light of the latest lockdown. And around that is the fact that actually nobody wants their buildings to close because church is so important and integral to people's lives, and yet we face the situation that we're in. And I think in that, for me, there is a kind of inner conflict playing out, because there is so much about the church that is important and why we shouldn't close. So there is, for example, so much that we do in Stockport that isn't necessarily just about gathering together to worship, that could be deemed as essential, which is why perhaps we should choose to stay open. And yet, let's be honest, it doesn't feel particularly safe out there at the moment, does it? So should we actually, in the spirit of the thing, as the phrase has been bandied about over the last few days, join in with everybody else and choose to be closed? And that article, I think, addresses some of those questions and basically asks us to think about what the church is, or at least what the church could be once we emerge out of this pandemic.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is almost a year ago, it's nearly March, he says in the beginning of January, we were forced to shut. We had no option. We were told by the government, stay at home, and the Archbishop said, shut your church, and not even clergy incumbents who, when they are installed, licensed, collated, whatever the terminology is, they are given the keys to the parish and said, this is yours, look after it. And in that moment, we even had our right to enter our church building taken away from us. And we had no option. And I had a sense of grief about that. I couldn't go into the building that was synonymous with my church community and our daily, weekly, monthly activities. And that then lifted in July, and certainly at Bramall, we started worshipping together in August. But things were very different. We went from 2 services on a Sunday to 3, which meant we had 4 services a week. But everyone had to be 2 meters apart. We weren't allowed to sing. You were constantly worried about wearing your mask the right way and making sure that you didn't come in within 2 meters. And I found myself almost becoming a mini policeman, trying to make sure that those people who didn't know what 2 meters looked like did know what 2 meters looked like and moved back from each other, because we were just constantly, or I certainly was just constantly worried about us becoming an infection point. And for me, that changed what church is dramatically. Then we got to November and we were forced to shut again. Fine. and then reopened in December, looking to do Christmas as close to as we can, and the boundaries kept changing all the way through December. And actually I felt a sense of joy in our Christmas celebrations, despite the fact that it still didn't feel quite right. Preaching to people with their face masks on is really difficult. I don't know if you find that.
Yeah, I find it even more difficult, the fact that I haven't actually met anybody yet without a face mask on in my parish. So when we get to a point where we don't have to wear them anymore, I probably won't be able to recognise people for who they actually are.
Yeah. It takes me slightly longer to recognise someone at church now, because I have to work it out just by their eyes and their hair.
Yeah.
And if they're wearing a hat, I'm completely knocked off my game. So we get to that. We then get to Christmas. That's been all right, but it's not been what it normally is. But we've tried really hard to get there and to make the best of it. And then it's quite clear that we're going to be going into a lockdown. So as a church, we chose to shut our building. And that's where I guess it's an interesting point to be, because I've said constantly throughout lockdown, as many of my colleagues and other clergy have, the building is not the church. It is the church building, but the people are the church. But I think there is something about place that is really important. And I think I've said that before.
Definitely. And I think for people even outside of the church, there is something significant, if you like, about a church building. You know, often we hear people talk about that is their church, even if they don't go to it. But if something was to happen to it, they all of a sudden start to speak up. We're beginning some conversations about building a new church building, and it's interesting to see both the positives and the negatives of that from people within the community. And so there is something, I guess, about churches that is essential, and which is probably why they've been allowed to remain open during this third lockdown.
It's interesting to read that one of the reasons that the Telegraph think that churches haven't had to shut in this lockdown is because the government received so many letters from Christian leaders saying, how dare you shut our buildings, and also the former Prime Minister, Theresa May, weighing in and saying, hang on a minute, churches need to be open.
Yeah, which I guess in some respects kind of almost harks back to the day when we were genuinely a Christian nation. I don't think we are exclusively anymore. And so there is something of that, I think, that is wanting to be upheld still.
Yeah.
And yet we equally recognise that we're in a very different place now than we were before, and how this whole set of circumstances, as we've said before, is unique and is unprecedented, and which the church has never had to face in quite the same way before. And so I think it's important for us to ask those questions of, you know, what did we learn during this pandemic? What do we take with us? And what does the church look like when we emerge from this? I think we've talked about it before, that during the first lockdown there was an increase in people's prayer life, and there was also an increase in people engaging with worship in an online way. And so we have to ask questions about how we actually continue to engage with those people once we emerge from outside of our screens, once we're able to fully be the church as it is intended to be. Because I think we really struggle with the fact that actually what we've been doing, as lovely as it has been to kind of see people in the flesh again, actually it's only half of what we would expect or what we would want or what we actually appreciate and value about the church.
Yeah, so I think one of the conversations we were having as we kind of were thinking about this week's episode is, okay, so in the period between August and October here at Bramall, I can't remember when you opened in Stockport. July and October and then December, is we had church. And okay, we've had church all year, it's just been online, but we had physical gathered church. But a lot of what we've heard has been, it's not right. It didn't feel right. And we spent some time reflecting on actually, well, it's not wrong, but it didn't feel right. And I guess the question we asked was, well, what wasn't right? And part of that was we weren't allowed to share fellowship. Part of that was actually we were prioritising a set of rules and cleaning for the physical safety of people over and above maybe the spiritual care of people.
Yeah, and this article actually talks about a church warden who resigned because he felt so constricted by those set of rules and regulations, if you like, that he almost felt like he didn't realise he didn't feel like he was coming to church.
Yeah, I mean, in a number of communion services, I felt a real kind of desire to want to pray for healing for people, or to at least offer space for people to receive prayer for healing. But actually, whilst the Spirit doesn't need the laying on of hands, and the Spirit can do what the Spirit needs to do, God isn't bound by our way of praying. Actually, the biblical precedent for praying for healing is laying on hands and anointing with oil. And that's just, by the public health guidelines, a big no at the moment.
Yeah, and I think there's something in that actually that's really important for us, because of course we can still meet with God no matter where we are or what we're doing or what our worship looks like. Of course God can transcend all of that, but yet there is something in all of that stuff that is for us, and I think we shouldn't take that for granted. I think it's important for us to acknowledge the ways in which God speaks to us uniquely and personally, and which we find great comfort and hope from.
So I guess that prioritising public health rules over biblical precedent is one of the things that just doesn't necessarily feel quite right about church at the moment. I would actually argue that wearing face masks is another thing that just makes church not feel quite right, because not being able to see the bottom half of the person's face actually, I think, says something. I mean, I've just been reading about Isaac marrying his wife, and the servant goes off to find the wife, and they're found in the distance and in a completely different part of the land, and the servant brings the betrothed, the person to be betrothed, back to Isaac, and she says, "Who is that over there?" And he says, "Oh, that's your to-be husband." And she covers her face. And when Moses meets with the people of Israel, having been in the presence of God, he has to cover his face so that they are shielded from the glory of God. And shielding people's faces in the Bible is about it's not just about protecting people, but it's also putting a barrier up. And whilst that barrier is for our own physical safety again, I think it gets in the way of our fellowship and our spirituality and our kind of worship life, which actually is as important. And so there's that element of actually that's not quite right.
Yeah, and I think the other big thing for me that it kind of comes off the back of that is one of the reasons why I feel that we should be closed at the moment is because in the government guidance it said that worship is permitted to happen, but people aren't allowed to mingle. Yeah. And I think the choice of that word actually, in some respects, hits the nail on the head of what church is about, and so which is why we should just probably not have it, because we shouldn't put ourselves in risk, I think, or risk of being told off for doing it, because actually there is something in our DNA as Christian people that is about other people, is about being together, and I think it's really hard for us, and I think we've seen that in the times that we have been allowed to have in-person worship, that actually there is that desire to be with people. And yet that is still restricted through the wearing of face coverings and through hopefully the 2 metre distancing that people are observing. And yet we recognise that sometimes that's really hard for us to do, because all we want to do is have a kind of normal and genuine conversation with somebody, or reach out to them, and even just placing a hand on theirs when you hear something that is bothering them. There's
been so many people I just wanted to give a hug to because life's been rubbish for them.
Exactly, and I just think, actually, is it better for us to just not put that temptation, if you like, in our way, because we're all guilty of it. I think even we've probably done it at times without thinking, because it's just that there's something innate in us that does that. Humans
were created for a relationship, and relationship isn't something that can be maintained at the best possible quality 2 meters away.
Yeah.
So we just kind of wanted to share some of our thoughts about why church maybe hasn't felt completely right in the last few months. And I know some of you, I guess the other thing to mention is we've not been allowed to sing.
Yeah,
That's
I think
the
that's
biggie.
a big thing for a lot of people, isn't it?
I did a funeral on Tuesday, and we're recording this on Tuesday, hence why I'm wearing a black shirt, but you're watching this on Thursday. And we had Abide With Me as the hymn, and every time I have a hymn at whatever service, when there are other people present, I kind of stand there going, I want to be able to sing. It's biblical, it's a command of God to praise his name. There's something innate within us that our souls want to sing.
Yeah, and I think even more than that, there's something about singing that is about declaring the truth of what we believe, which perhaps is something we need now more than ever.
And it lifts the soul.
Yeah.
And it brings joy to you, even when you're singing a dirge, maybe. Maybe not. So we just wanted to share some of how we've been feeling about maybe what isn't quite right about church when we're either doing it online because we're not gathered at all, or when we are gathered and it still doesn't feel quite right, as complimentary as many people are about services in person. But we're also very hopeful that actually this year, and it's hopefully only a couple of months away, he says,
hopefully, God
hopefully, that we can have gathered worship where we don't need to sit 2 meters away. And hopefully this year we might even be able to sing together, but we might have to sing with face masks on, I guess. That could be it could be a phased thing. And actually, I think Jess has already said it. We can and should take some of the lessons from the last 12 months with us into the future, so that we shouldn't be going back to St Michael's February 2020, and I don't mean Wonderland, but February 2020 when we did everything because we always had done, but we should be going to a place where we are embracing everything that we used to do along with the lessons learned on the way. So actually, if singing is really important and we really missed it, are we embracing singing enough in our services? If the words of our hymns are really important because actually that's all we've been able to engage with by looking at them and reading along with them, how do we take that important discipline with us when we just start singing them again? If spending time in people's presence less than 2 meters away and without face masks is really important, how do we make sure that we take that importance with us and don't fall back into the trap of just taking it for granted?
Definitely. And I think that's perhaps maybe not in as a detailed sense as that is what we want to talk about over the next few weeks. I think we want to start to lift our eyes a little bit from where we are now to where we could be when we all eventually emerge vaccinated post-pandemic, and where it's a bit safer for us to do all those things and to be together again. And so we're going to think about what we might learn from where we've been this past nearly 12 months. That feels hard to say.
It is crazy that by the time I reckon, and I'm going to kind of just hedge my bets here, I will have said it. We're on Tuesday, got PCC meeting tomorrow night, which is Wednesday, and then you're watching this on Thursday, so PCC happened yesterday, so I will have already said this publicly, but I haven't said it yet. I reckon we're going to come out of lockdown and be able to worship together in April.
Well, that's the hope, isn't it?
That's what I think, which means if that's the case, we will have been in lockdown and had measures that have kind of made life difficult for a whole year.
Yeah. So, but I think, let's not just dwell on that. Let's take the good stuff from that last year. I was amazed actually when I sat down at the end of 2020 to think about the things that we'd done, thinking that actually there wouldn't be anything, and yet we've done some really lovely things as a family, not least just having the time together as the three of us watching Samuel grow. But actually, let's take what is good. Let's look for the stuff that was good to take with us as we begin to emerge into whatever life and church will look like when we're out of all of this.
Yeah, so this is the challenge really. This is partly to see how many people actually watch to the end, and to see if people are listening to us, or if they've just got us on in the background and they're busy watching EastEnders or something else. What's on at 10 o'clock in the morning? Bargain hunt? I don't know.
Something like that.
We want to hear from you. What should church look like post-COVID? What are the things that you have missed that you want back? What are the things that have never existed and you have always been looking for but never found? And what have been the good things from lockdown that you want us to take with you? And don't say short sermons.
Well, and even what are the things that you have had that you'd be quite happy to see got rid of, or you could live without?
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. So we want to hear from you, and we will keep all those comments anonymous, but we will share a few of them, and they will maybe shape some of our conversations over the next few weeks. We're also maybe going to draw on some material from various books. This is one of them that we're going to draw from. It's quite an interesting cover. It's by a guy called Francis Chan, who is a pastor in the United States. And this book he wrote in response to leaving his church. So he used to be a pastor of a mega church that had thousands of people attend it. And he left because he realised he couldn't find God there. And that's not because they weren't a particularly holy place, but actually he had kind of been led to reimagine what church looks like. And he's now a pastor of a network of house churches in another part of the country, because he felt a call to be part of a network of small churches rather than one large church. So he's done some writing about what were the distinct and unique marks of the church that he felt God was calling him to, out of something that was much bigger and very different.
Yeah.
So that's where we're going, but we are reliant on getting some feedback. So you can either post your feedback in a comment, which means everybody else will see it, or you can message our Facebook page, or you can even drop me an email, and my email address is appearing here right now, and will also appear in the comments box below.
And you can even pop it on a piece of paper through our letterbox.
Yeah, we love getting posts. Put it in an envelope and stick it through the post box. Samuel loves playing with our posts.
We might not get it if he plays with it too much.
Yeah.
So I think that's it for this week. But as Calum says, do drop us a line, because that will really help us in the coming weeks.
Great.
But for now, look after yourselves, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.